So it's not school exactly at home where it's like, this is your teacher, these are your books, good luck. It's like, okay, well, we have to learn math. We need to know some math. Math is important for almost anything you do. Because you have to understand your finances and you're in a Bitcoin. You have to understand how the world works. You have to understand how interest works and all of this. You have to know some math. So it's like, okay, when we talk about that, they're like, you have to know some basics here. And we're probably need to do some financial education with our kids too. So it's not going to just be like math. It's going to be like, okay, well, let's talk about how you make money and how money is made and what happens when you get a loan.
I love you so much.
Like all these things.
Well, hello, human. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Be You Get Paid podcast. I'm your host, Amy Taylor, and I have one goal by being in your ears: to explore as many conversations and perspectives as possible on stuff we did not learn in school. You know, stuff that would have actually helped a lot more of us thrive rather than just survive as grown-ups in an often challenging and ever-changing world. As the title might suggest, this includes anything involved with knowing ourselves, understanding money, and generally anything that might offer some insight into how we can all be happier humans. With that in mind, wherever you're listening, you'll find links to some of the best resources I have personally found to help with all of those things. Sometimes I'll talk about these in a bit more detail, and I want you to know I will only ever recommend products, services, and companies that I am a customer or user of myself. Now, we're all grown-ups here, and as such, you'll possibly hear the occasional use of grown-up language. More importantly, anything discussed here is personal opinion and intended for conversational and educational purposes only, and should not be taken as financial or investment advice. That's the housekeeping done. Let's get into what I hope is some helpful chat. I found your article on Does School Make Kids Hyperactive? And it was such good timing because I think you wrote it was March. I've got it here. I printed it, old school. Just because it's relevant to me personally. So it's a bit of a selfish inquiry. My partner has a 6-year-old. He's 7 in November. And he's mild but suspected ADHD. I think his mum's taking him through the diagnosis process at the moment. And again, that's just a label. But it was really interesting reading it right now because I was like, oh, God, that sounds familiar. And your 5 tips, we'll get into it. But first of all, just give us a quick intro to you, where you are, what you do for a living. And then we'll get into the homeschool stuff.
Oh, sure. So I am an associate professor at a large research institution here in the United States. And so my work has predominantly been in neuroscience and neurophysiology, so how the brain controls the body. And most of my research up until the last couple of years has been around helping people who have had a stroke try to relearn, like develop new therapies for people who have had a stroke. So I'm really kind of a neuroscientist in training. But my more recent push, and this is somewhat related to my new interests in homeschooling my kids, which is a fairly new phenomenon for me. And but I study a lot of pedagogy. So what is best teaching practices in the classroom? And I've been interested in that for a very long time, but I haven't studied it as a scientist. But that's my new research is around that, particularly with students who have mental health disorders. And so in the classroom, so in the US, and this is it's probably also true in Australia, are very close to true, 50% of our engineering undergraduates screen positive for mental health disorder. So that's like anxiety, significant anxiety, depression, PTSD, those types of disorders. And so it's like half of our students, right? And the universities tend to do things like giving flexible deadlines or flexible attendance and things like this, but no one's really evaluated if that's actually even good for some of these students. And it might be good in some cases, but not necessarily good in all cases. And no one's really evaluated what are some of the best strategies that we can do to be supportive of students. And so that's kind of my new research realm is in that, trying to figure out how to help students. When you
said the 50% of graduates or undergraduates, did you say, is that in a particular topic or just across the board?
In engineering, in
engineering.
specific, though. So I'm in engineering. I know I said neuroscience, but I'm housed within an engineering department and school. Mostly it's higher in engineering, but it's not so different from other disciplines. So if you look at the university wide, it's a little bit lower, but it's still pretty high. in Western, and we can talk about what's causing that. But the trouble is that it's there, and that we should, that's a whole other bag of worms, right? But it's certainly there, and we aren't talking about how to talk to students and be with students and create good learning environments for students. And not a lot of times people want to do things that are nice, but we have to make sure that those things are the right things for students.
Oh, amen. Yeah. Tough love sometimes.
Sometimes, but not always. So it's complicated. We have to study it first instead of we just do willy-nilly things.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what I love reading in your tweets and your articles is just, it's all about everyone being an individual, which is my language.
Yes, and everyone's an individual.
100%. And I like to do a little bit of statistical research before I talk to people if it's relevant. And in your case, I always go straight to Gallup for the Gallup polls because I read a lot of their reports for the coaching I do, because it feeds directly into the modality that I coach with based on people playing to their strengths, not worrying about their weaknesses. And I think, that's so aligned with, I think, a lot of people who choose homeschooling because it's the institution is just not right for their children. And one of the polls that Gallup did recently, or they have an index for, is trust in governmental institutions. And one of those is public schools. And I've just pulled up a graph here. I might link it in the show notes or send it to you to have a look at. It's pretty straightforward. It's trust on that indicator from the polls they've done has halved since roughly 75. Trust in public schools, like that seems like a long period of time, but it's a generation, right? It's our parents to us, to our children.
Very short. Yeah, homeschooling was still predominantly illegal in the 70s. So, lots has changed.
Yeah, and it's on the rise, albeit slowly. And it's interesting because so many figures that the mainstream media spit out at the moment are so skewed because it's like people forgot the world shut down for 3 years. So, of course, it rose in 2020. But that's probably a good place to start with your journey with it, because you weren't homeschooling prior to that, right? It was something that everyone was forced into and you've embraced it.
Well, yeah, and that was kind of a weird thing actually for us because we were having such a different we were having such a different response to COVID than everybody else. So everybody was complaining and miserable, and their kids were home and driving them crazy, and we had never been happier. Wow. Like I was like this, and it was such just such an eye-opening experience. And I had felt. My kids we thought we were awesome because we kept them out of daycare until they were 9 months old. So now, of course, I look back and think that all of their time in daycare and school was one of the biggest regrets of it. I will always carry that with me. I so regret it. But we've got lots of time with them now, and we learned things, right? And they were in daycare and doing that whole thing for the whole time. And my oldest had lots of lots of anxiety. She obviously had anxiety. She was young, so it was hard to tell that that's what it was. Now I know more, and I can say what she had was school was incredibly stressful. She was having lots of just outbursts. She just was really emotional all the time. And it was just when they were home, it was just trying to keep them. It was just really hard. And I was really struggling. I felt depressed. I was really unhappy and miserable. And COVID happened, and the kids came home from school, and all of a sudden we just felt whole again. And the kids had never been happier or more peaceful. And I was like, I just wasn't supposed to be away from my kids all the time. And I don't think they were supposed to be away from me all the time. And we just fell in love with it. And I remember, so the summer of 2020 was before my birthday. I turned 40, and my husband said, "What do you want for your 40th birthday?" And I said, "I want to homeschool my kids." And so
yes, that's cheap
because it's it's
or maybe not.
Well, but it's not cheap actually, right? So like I bring in 40% of our money, and so it's been a conversation, and it's been a long process and trying to figure out that. But we were lucky because I was working at the university and everything was remote and you could teach online, and so I was like, well, there's never been a better time to just try this. I was like, if we hate it, we can put them back into school, So we tried it, and of course we fell in love. And the kids won't go back until if they want to. Then we'll have that conversation with them.
Sure.
We're not won't force them to homeschool.
And you have two kids, and they're 8 and 6. Is that right?
They just, so 9 and 6, but yes, they just turned 9. So
still like primary school, or what we would call primary school over here.
Yes.
Still of an age where they're fairly
it was 5
active.
and 3.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah.
They are. Yeah. So COVID. Yeah. So that was, when I got out a lot of stuff because during COVID, because I'd be like, I'm sorry, I can't do that because I have a 3-year-old running around, and they're like, oh yeah. So that's fine. And of course, for me, I'm just like, this is great. We're just gonna like play here and do our little worksheets. And we printed off worksheets. We had no idea what we were doing homeschool wise. We changed into all sorts of things since
Were
then.
You already working from home?
Well, when the university, no, it wasn't. So okay. I would say maybe I work from home 1 day a week because that's common. I had to do a lot of writing, and it's better to do a lot of writing, grant writing, and that kind of stuff at home than it is when there's lots of people around and stuff. So, but I was on campus 4 days a week. Oh, really? You prefer getting out?
I need to go to a coffee shop when I want to do anything creative. I'm at home for my admin tasks that don't require which side of the brain? I don't know. Left? Whichever. I prefer noise when I want to be creative. So go on.
Nowadays, I would agree with you. I was going to say so it used to be no one was at home. So I come home and it was really like, there's nobody here. But now there's so much activity. Like I prefer to go someplace else sometimes, but you got to make it work with what you got.
Right. And I think this is for anyone, you're so right. Like the majority of my friends who had their kids at home were like, when will this end? And it's the same during school holidays. Like, when can they get back? And I think
I feel so much for those kids. I'm like, who's loving on those kids all the time?
Yeah. I mean, it's like so many things at the moment. People are completely divided, polarized, but it's just being open enough to embrace it. And COVID forced people to have to embrace certain things. And I think my take, I don't have children. We may not, I don't know. But my take on school, and it's one of the reasons I've sort of given my podcast a bit of a subtext of all the things, anything that we didn't learn at school that helps us thrive in the world we live in now, which is very different, even as, mainly because of COVID. Yeah. I think a lot of people's eyes have been opened on a lot of things. Again, trust in government institutions or the way we've always done things is changing. We'll get onto Bitcoin later. But, I think seeing through your lens of how kids are responding is so interesting because they are the ones that are going to make the difference. We can vote for who we want. We can adopt a new currency if we want. But these things, clearly, 25, 50 years of change, it's going to take a while. So you did a poll on Twitter and you found, I don't know how many people voted, but when you started tweeting, sharing of your experience of homeschooling, you found 79 voters said their kids also were more calm at home.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So going back to your earlier point about mental health, there's obviously a correlation with, and it's my bias, it's my opinion, there's a correlation between the structure of our systems. And, I flew through school academically, but I'm still at 40 going, who am I? What am I doing? I'm a bit clearer now, but I was still at 30. I got through school really well. And socially, I was fine. My mum really didn't have much of a choice. She was on her own and working. And I think that's often the reason a lot of people would just go, it's not an option for us. We're both working. Well, everyone should have the option to work remotely in a lot of desk-based jobs now, which I'm a big advocate for. And if you can't find a job, start your own thing, which you're doing both, and monetizing it, which again, we'll get onto later. So what would you give us your top 3 tips maybe for parents that if they had the opportunity to give it a crack and they could work from home, how on earth, because my biggest thing, I get anxiety thinking about it and I don't even have children. How on earth do you make it work when you're working full time and now your husband's working full time? That might be helpful or a hindrance, I don't know. What are your top 3 tips for parents who might want to give this a go in and around 2 full-time careers?
Well, so it's such a complicated question. I would say that, so I think the biggest thing is it has to be the right job. Not all jobs are conducive. However, let me loop back for a minute because I have met people who make all sorts of different things work. I know I've connected with several single parents who are homeschooling their kids. I have, and that's actually one of the ways I convinced myself that I could, like, both of us work full time and homeschool my kids, is I found these blogs of these women that were like it was two women and they were single parents homeschooling their kids. I was like, well, if she can do it, I can certainly do it. I've got a partner. Brilliant. I was like, there's a whole other person. There's two of us. Mm-hmm. So, and so they're just rock stars. And I was like, and you have time to write about it. I mean, they're just amazing human beings. So there are people that make that work. There's several podcasts out there that, they've interviewed people. I think the big thing that I have found is that it really comes down to the flexibility of your job. As you know, my job is, I have a lot of control over my schedule. If you have a job where you don't have a lot of control over your schedule, it's going to be nearly impossible unless one of the jobs needs to be flexible. Ideally, if both it's of them two parents, yeah. But if it's two parents and you're working with two parents, if you're a single parent trying to homeschool, you've got to have that flexibility to say, I'm working now or I'm not working then. I have a lot of control over my schedule as a professor. I get to pick more or less when, not 100%, but I can say I want my classes in the evenings. So I teach in the evenings. My husband works in the mornings. I can say I don't want to schedule that time in the morning. I want to be in the afternoon. And so I can work. I have that kind of flexibility. And I don't think if you have that, I think it's really, really hard. I do know there was one woman who was seeming to make it work where she was working nights as an emergency care person. But she was only doing it 3 days a week. But because of the length of the shift, it was full-time work. Yeah. So, there's some people that make alternative schedules. I also think, so one, job flexibility. Two, I think, you don't have to, it's not school at home. There's no reason that you have to do it on, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. It can be just the mornings. It can be weekends. It can be evenings. It has to work with your kids. I think I have found my children, mornings is school time, and that's best because that's when they can get that really strong focus. And why I mean that is like the more academic subjects, like the subjects that really require that focus, like writing and spelling and math. But they would do science any time of the day. They would do history because we do history really fun any time of the day. They would do, that kind of stuff. They like anytime. And like right now they do typing and Hindi lessons and recorder lessons, and they do that basically every day. I didn't tell them they had to, but they're just like, this is what we do every day. And I was like, okay, that's what you do every day. And they picked it up and they run with it. So, I mean, I think there's a time and place for everything, but for a while we were basically only doing science on the weekends. So that you just have to break down the schedule, and you also have to break, and that's number 3 is that you have to decide what it is that you want your kids. What is school? What does homeschooling look like? There's a whole unschooling community. I don't know if you've heard of unschoolers.
I've read the term, and I was going to get onto that to ask you the distinctions between the different things. So there was unschooling, homeschooling, and distance learning. Those were the 3 that I saw. So what do you do? And then we'll look at the other 2.
I would say we are some sort of combination of unschooling and homeschooling, though I think we're moving much more closely to homeschooling. Unschooling, and there's even within unschooling, there's dichotomy. So there's radical unschoolers, and they are to the place where they really don't tell their kids to do much of anything. It's really letting them just kind of find their own path, explore. And so there's it's bold. And then there's more of just the regular unschool. But I've seen kids who've come out of those programs and they're already doing, like, they'll find what they're interested in, and that's the thing that they do. And so they'll be really, really good at, like, filmmaking when they're like 16, because that's what they've had time to do. Right. And then there's more of a broader unschooling net where there's a little bit more of a coaching model to it. So they're coaching their kids and they're a little bit more engaged and doing a little bit more bringing things together. And I would say that I was very inspired by the unschoolers initially in particular. And I came across, and I think this will loop back to something you said earlier. There is this wonderful podcast. It's called Living Joyfully, I think. And it's all about unschooling. And she interviewed former unschoolers, right? And I was like, how do these kids turn out? Like, I want to hear the adults that were unschooled. And she talked to this one woman, and she said that she always wanted to be a vet. She wanted to be a vet. That's all she wanted to be. And when she was a kid, and so her family moved to like a big farm, and she got to follow around a big animal vet. And when she was 12, she was like, I don't want to be a vet. And they were like, why?
Wow.
What happened? And she's like, I thought being a vet was taking care of cute, fun animals. It turns out you're just basically taking care of sick animals all the time. And I just don't want to be with sick animals all the time. And, but I thought, because she got to try it, because she got to follow a vet, because she didn't have a typical school day, because she got to actually see what it was like.
What you don't want.
Right, exactly. And I was like, I said, in a normal world, she would have gone to high school, gone her veterinary degree, and she would be 26 or 28 with all of this college debt and, to get all these big degrees and be like, I don't really want to be a vet. I thought it was this, and it's this other thing entirely. Yeah. And I think that model, and I think that can, can happen in all of the models. It doesn't have to be unschooling only. But because within that unschooling model, they just allowed her to explore whatever she was interested in. And the woman, she was like 24, 25, and maybe she's a little bit older, but anyway, she was in her mid 20s at most. And she'd been running her own business for 10 years. Not only has she been running her own business, she was starting off another branch, and she was going to have the other person do it. I was like, she was 20, just because she'd had all this time, right, to be invested. So
what was the business? Sorry to interrupt you. What had she done?
She had moved into, it was like a salon. She was running a salon. So she like did beauty, hair and makeup and
right, okay,
like a beauty salon, yeah. Yeah, I guess that word means different things in different countries. And then more of the homeschooling, I always forget. More of the homeschooling model is a little bit more traditional school. So I would say we're a little bit closer to that model now. We have do science, and we do history, and we do our math, and we do our language arts. However, I'm very influenced by the unschoolers, and the unschoolers are it's very student-led, it's very, so like if my kids, and actually this was true at the very beginning, they're like, I don't like this math. And it wasn't that they didn't like math. It was that they didn't like the way that math was being taught to them and the way that the method. And so we got rid of all the curriculum, and we just kind of worked through here's this way to do math. Do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like puzzles? Do you like the logic things? How do you like manipulandums? And so I figured that out, and then I was able to bring a curriculum to them. Said, let's try this. And and I always say, we've got this. You need to try it for a while, but if you don't like it, then we'll have a conversation, and it's a back and forth. So it's not school exactly at home where it's like, this is your teacher, these are your books, good luck. It's like, okay, well, we have to learn math. We need to know some math. Math is important for almost anything you do, because you have to understand your finances, and you're in a Bitcoin. You have to understand how the world works. You have to understand how interest works, and all of this. You have to know some math. So it's like, okay, when we talk about that, we're like, you have to know some basics here. And we're probably need to do some financial education with our kids too. So it's not going to just be like math. It's going to be like, okay, well, let's talk about how you make money and how money is made and what happens when you get a loan.
I love you so much.
All of these things, it's like, well, if you're going to go to college, well, what degree are you going to get? And do you really need college for that degree? And anyway, the point being that you have to know some math. And but I don't care, exactly which math program you have. I want you to love math. I want you to come to it with joy. And that goes for all the subjects. It's like with reading. We didn't, my 5-year-old, she came home when she was at school. They're like, this teacher, she doesn't read enough. She doesn't like to read. Well, now I can't keep her in books. She's going through books so fast. But it was a lot of what of these things would you like to read? And I would read to her, and then she would want to pick up the book I was reading and keep reading. And it was modeling. And it's just, anyway, so there's lots of things.
On reading, I think it was you. I mean, I've probably had all sorts of other people put in front of me.
Reading, because reading is awesome.
I think it was you. Well, a couple of things. You said about digital versus paper reading, that you've done an article on that.
Yes.
But the bigger one that stuck out to me, I'm sure it was you. You said basically don't stop reading stories to your children, because however old they might be, because it's going to deny them, or not deny them, but likely to decrease their desire to read themselves. Is that what you said? Something along those lines.
Well, I don't remember if I said exactly that, but I do agree with that statement. The reading to your children, and even your older children, is amazing for lots of reasons. It's a family bonding time. You're all sitting down reading a story together. And when you younger kids, you're basically like, did you understand this story? Versus older kids, it's like, what is this story trying to tell you? What is the author can you draw connections between this story and another story? And those are conversations that a kid, a 14-year-old can't, or 15-year-old, even an 18-year-old, goodness. I mean, I think about my 18-year-old self being able to really understand what an author is trying to, I had a hard time doing that. Like, I was just like, I don't get it. I didn't even really like this book that much. Versus if you have someone that, right. Versus taking the time to like kind of draw these connections and pull things together. And, kids love to do that. And then and the more books that they're exposed to, my oldest is starting to do that. She's like, I said, do you read this book? She's like, oh yeah, it was a lot like the story of this. And it's a different culture. And she's like, they told it slightly this way. It ended different than this one. And I said, well, why do you think it ended different? And so those are the kinds of things. But I also think that, I read to my kids, but I also have audiobooks read to my kids. But I'm in the room with them. Like, we listen. Yeah. And so if you get some of these just amazing orators reading these books, they're learning through that. Like, I've watched how my kids, when they see an exclamation point, they exclaim it, and they'll make voices, and they just and that's so important. You get your job, right? Like, you're coaching, and you're doing this interfacing, like, to be able to have a really emotive voice. And when you're coaching, you gotta be the champion sometimes.
You're dealing with humans. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so they're learning that through a lot of the reading of these books. And I'm a huge believer in just the great literature. Though I would say I hated all the literature when I hated history, which I have fallen in love with since teaching my kids. I hated reading all those really long books, which I have also fallen in love with reading with my kids. So there's all this stuff that school taught me to hate. Like, I hated it. I hated school. I hated all of it. Everyone's like, you were in school an awful long time for someone who hated it. But I think that was just because, like what you said, I didn't know what else I was supposed to do. I just kept following the path. And I don't want that for my kids. I want them to.
Yeah. And that's so interesting, because you are the epitome of an academic, right? And there's this ongoing conversation at the moment, but particularly with people. I actually led a panel at a Bitcoin conference recently, and we called it Education versus Academia, because we're just in this world now where it's the information age. Like, you are an academic teaching me or teaching us, and you have this kudos because you are a professor, but your kids will likely be learning from one another because they've consumed all this information, and they can now do so on crack because they can put their audiobooks on 2x to listen to, or I'm not quite at 2x, but I'm at 1.5 with depending on the reader. But
it depends on the reader.
It does, which is so important. Again, it's the human element. And now we have machine learning and AI, so they can pull up information, and there's pros and cons to that too. But so how do you feel about, if, say, all academic institutions were going to die, as someone who is an academic, what are your thoughts on that? Because obviously there's some jobs that I would like to think my heart surgeon is still going to go and get the academia for that. But how do you feel about that?
I think academia is completely bloated, and it's just a huge, my husband or my dad always likes to talk about, like, how when companies get too big, they become these they can't really move very quick, and they can't really make good decisions. And startups, they can just shoot over there, over here. They're really fast and nimble, and and that's why they can drive really big changes. Right.
Yes.
And I think that academia has just got, and I mean the university system in general. When I think of academia, sometimes I think more of the research elements, and we can talk about that too. But in terms of the university system as a whole, I just think it's big and it's bloated, and it's trying to bring everybody in. It's trying to do too many things not very well. And I think that, like you said, I think there's going to be some careers you're going to need a higher education degree. And I'll say this for my kids. I'm a university professor, and I don't know if my kids will go to college. It'll depend on what they want to do. If they want to be a doctor, okay, you got to go to college for that. You want to be a lawyer, okay, you probably have to go to college for that. You want to be a writer? I don't understand the point. You want to be you want to start, be in communications? I don't see the point. You want to be, there's some things that you have to have, these degrees for. But a lot of these things you just don't. You want to start your own company? I don't see the point. Like, there's so many vastly better ways and cheaper ways to learn. The university I go to, which is a large I'm a part of, is a large public, one of the cheaper universities. It's still going to take $100,000 to get through 4 years of that degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I told people, I was like, like even if you go and you sign up for some guy on the internet who's going to teach you something and it costs you $5,000, like, and even if it's terrible, you're still doing better. Like you're still like, then find another person that's the right person. Find another woman that's a better fit for you. Like it's just, there's so much content out there and so many ways to learn things. And some of the best ways to learn things are just to shadow and to, intern and just, do things for free for people. And, there's just so many other ways to learn. And I think that are better ways to learn, to be honest. And so I actually think it would be good for the university system to lean down a bit. But that's not their goals. And nor should it be. Like, they're a business. They pretend like they're nonprofits. They're not. They're making money. Their goal is to bring as many students in and keep as many students in and have them persist all the way through. That's their business model, and that's fine. But I think it would be good for them to have to work harder for the students and to, and it not necessarily be everybody. So
wow,
that's my opinion.
That segment will definitely be going on social media many times, because it's just an advert. It's for everything I do, like get online, learn a skill, apply that skill to the things that you're interested in. I'm a talker. That's why I'm doing a podcast now. Do I know what I'm doing? No, but I learned it through pretty much free resources. But there's a lot within that. I haven't studied interview technique yet. It's on my list. There's all sorts of things that you're going to find your way. And like you say, if you're willing, by doing. Exactly right. And I'm definitely going to link to this article, because it's given me so many things that I want to ask you, but we'll be here for hours. I could talk to you about this stuff all day. But where you've just left off with the institutions, point 3 in this article was high control environment. So there's so many rabbit holes we could go down with this one. So you were talking about it from a perspective of the impacts of kids who perhaps don't thrive in a traditional school environment because of it being high control. And you've touched on a few things there that make a lot of sense. And you've also now just touched on it with the academic institutions. But going back to kids in school, and selfishly from the ADHD perspective and the hyperactivity perspective and the impact on kids, tell us a bit more about that. Like, what did you see, I guess, in your own kids, and the connection, the attachment style of parenting? Like, I'm selfishly asking you this to see how we can do best with what we're dealing with when we have him.
Yeah. So I think what happened was, so it was noticeable that when my kids came home from school, that and after, not right away, but within a month or two, that they were just peaceful. They were just calmer. And it's hard to, and I remember we went to the beach with my parents, and I guess must have been a year after COVID. So it must be that 2021 era. And I just remember, like, we're still doing our, like, my kids would get out there, like, work notebooks, and we were still trying to figure out the right curriculum. So it was like more worksheety stuff, but they would just sit there and peacefully do them. And my mom was like, we've got to get them busy. We got to take them out the door. I got to move. And I was like, they're fine.
There's that, like, generational thing.
They're okay. Well, no, it's because they're used to their other grandkids. And my, right. So, and then we're around other, the schooled kids, and there's just a different energy to them. It's like, I've got, and if you talk to other homeschool parents, they'll say the same thing. Like, I can walk up to a playground. And I remember, so when you go to the playgrounds in your homeschooler at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, there's either homeschool kids are there or there's nobody there. And I remember I walked up to the playground last year, and there were all these kids on the playground. And I'm like, that's a lot of kids on the playground. And then as I got closer, I was like, these are not homeschool kids. Like, there's just a totally different, just like a wild, just like, got it. I just have these 15 minutes to get all this crazy energy out. And sure enough, it was like the local school had just brought them over after a field trip, and they were just running around and stuff. And
burning off.
I think my kids get to play, not whenever they want, but they get as much play as they need, and even their work is play to them. Like they don't, spelling lessons require a lot of focus. They don't super love that, but But the science, it's fun. The history is fun. And even within their math lessons, it's a lot of riddles and games and these sorts of things. And with their language arts, they love reading. They love stories. They're getting to color things. We do all these other kinds of activities and stuff. And so it's play for them. Their learning is playful. And so they don't feel the need to have all this extra play that they need. And so I think that just from a psychological standpoint, kids have to go into school and they have to sit in their tiny little chair before I think it's age appropriate to do that. And we tell adults, I think it might've been you that was saying, we tell adults that they have to get up every 10 minutes and go walk around, but like kids have to sit still in this one little spot. And it's like, you can't get out until lunch, and lunch is 15 minutes and you got to eat that lunch as quickly as possible. And there's like this 20-minute recess and that's it. Right. It's like, it's really hard. So psychologically, I think that's really hard on growing bodies. And then, as a neurophysiologist, we can talk about all of the other influences that I think are enhancing and the ADHD, which is also related to the chemicals and the toxins that people are exposed to, children are exposed to, and in our food and our water and all of the other places, as well as screens and screens too young. Completely changes the way the brain develops, and that's known now. Like people have talked about it for a while, but your brain just develops differently, and we know that it has long-term effects on your ability to focus. And if you have obviously everyone needs screens. Like we're using a screen, the kids need to use screens.
Pros and cons.
But there's a difference between a 4-year-old using a screen and a 10-year-old using a screen. And a 15-year-old using a screen and a 30-year-old using a screen. It always has addictive power, but it's also your capacity to self-regulate. A 4-year-old has a very low capacity for self-regulation. They just, you try to take a screen away from a 4-year-old, it's tears, it's misery. My 9-year-old, we have long conversations about, it's like, this is the amount of time you get, and she gets it. I'm also able to be like, how does it feel if you've been on the screen too long? I don't know. I feel, and I'm like, right. You just kind of feeling like you feel anxious, you feel whatever. And so we can have conversations about that. So, I don't think, when you're dealing with these, I think it's not just the school, but it's all of these factors, right? The lack of recess, the lack of, and we could talk about attachment as well. I think that my children certainly had far less attachment that is one of the biggest changes. They are so attached to us, and we're really attached to them too. Works both ways, and I think more. I always loved my kids, but I think the attachment that we have and the closeness that we have is far different than it was. And I think that kids, they're at home. Parents have kids for the worst hours. They have them at the very beginning of the morning when they just get up and they're kind of cranky, and they have them for the last 2 hours of the day. Which the last hour of the day is still pretty tough around here. I'm just still like. But, but I have all these other wonderful, beautiful hours with them. So it's okay to have those cranky hours. It's not, and because we have all those other beautiful, wonderful hours with them, when I go and I talk to them, they feel it different. And I do think that matters, that, parents don't get to have this time. And the other thing is it's parents' worst time. If you're working, you're out working, you're tired, you're exhausted, you dealt with all the stuff at work. Sometimes your brain's still at work. You're trying to be present with your kid. It's super hard to do that. And I just think kids got it rough. And
I noticed you called it the Zoomies, those hours up in the evening. Yes. My mum calls it the witching hour. The witching hour, when everyone's tired and hungry and hangry. So on that then, you mentioned attachment. How do you find their levels of, maybe they were fine before, in terms of intentionally being away from you, their independence, their self-sufficiency? How are all those kind of skills, and even social skills, like possibly what some people might assume are the downsides of homeschooling?
Socialization, so I would say that there's been a progress with that. Let me address the socialization separate, but in terms of the attachment, I will say, and their independence associated with that, I feel like they went through a period where it was almost like a reattachment phase. So they just were like, I really don't want to be away from you now. I just got you back. It was almost like this insecurity. And I think that that's one of those things that, like, it was an insecure attachment. I didn't know that. And they didn't present, like, from a clinical perspective, as insecure attachment. They weren't having those levels of things, but you could tell after, because they were trying to reattach, that we went through that phase. But now, because we went through that, they're developing a whole other level of confidence, right? You know,
Wow.
like we'll say, like my little one decided she didn't want to do gymnastics anymore. So, well, you got to go up to the instructor. You got to go up to tell the instructor yourself that you're not
Yeah.
going to do it. And she was like, seemed a little nervous, and then she went, she did it, you know. And they're, you know, they go to camp and they're like, oh, I want to go to the whole day camp. Okay, fine, let's go to the whole day camp.
Awesome.
And they're making those choices, right? Do you
Great.
want to go to
That's
camp or not?
amazing.
As opposed to, and I think it's different, you know, like a lot of parents who have their kids in school and they're working, it's like, well, you're going to camp. Pick which camp. It's a different conversation versus my children. It's like, we don't have to go to camp. I'm just here anyway. But if you want, do you want to go to camp? Yeah, I want to go to camp. So they're making the choices to be away
Yes.
from us,
Which is independence.
You know, inappropriate. It's independence.
That is independence.
And, you know, and they're young to be making those choices, right?
Yeah.
And then in terms of socialization, I always ask, what kind of socialization defines socialization? And how are your children being socialized at school? And a lot of times people say, oh, well, they're making friends. And I said, are they?
No, they're being forced to hang out with people they might not like.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, in the elementary schools, the kids, if they're friends, they talk to each other. So they will literally find out the friend groups and separate them into different classrooms. So they're not even in the same classrooms with their friends on purpose. They make it that way because otherwise they talk. God forbid. And
God, I remember being, because I'm chatty, because you're chatty, you need to go sit at the back. You're not allowed to sit with your friend. I'm like, what?
Yes. I was always, my mom said that once she came to like the parent teacher conferences and they sat down and they're like, my mom said, how's it going? And the teacher just went like this. She's just like, she just talks all the time.
Yeah.
But I was bored. I was bored stiff. I was just totally bored all the time. And I don't know what it was like for other kids, but I was just bored all the time. And that's one of the things I love about homeschooling is that, you know, if they've got something, we just move on. And if they don't got it, we get to spend longer on it, you know, both ways. Yeah. It goes both ways. We can move
or if they like it, you'll
slow.
Stay on it, you know?
They like it, we can stay on it forever. Oh.
Yeah. I'm thinking of my partner's. My partner's little boy, he's absolutely obsessed with maps. And when he's with us, like he knows the roads, his memory for roads and sense of direction. Like I am academic and I always was quite bright. I cannot find my way home without Google Maps, even if it's 10 minutes away. Like it's just not a strength for me. So I'm always trying to, when he does it, I'm trying to reinforce how clever he is because he does struggle in other things. And it's just
the visual spatial awareness is huge.
Yeah. And it's interesting just listening to everything you're saying. Like it's, why do we treat children, like our generation, especially personal development and self-help is all so normal now. Going to therapy, very normal now. So why is it that when we're learning all these things about, as an adult, it's important to emotionally regulate because we live in this stressful, overwhelming world, which is becoming more and more stressful and overwhelming as time goes on with cost of living rising, which is the big one that ties into money and Bitcoin for me. Well, then why are we continuing to exercise the same control over children? And just listening to you, it's this whole polarization thing again. It's, okay, you can give them control or you can give them complete freedom, but everyone's going to have something on that spectrum, right? So what I'm getting from you, which is so great and takes a lot of effort, I'm sure, but it works, is just where are their boundaries? They're going to, that whole attachment thing, you said the insecurity to start with, but it's like now, I'm assuming what you're saying is they've kind of found their own comfort zone with what they know that you're going to give them the freedom to explore, but they also know there's a boundary on you will need to do certain things. This is how the world works. But with a willingness to just be comfortable in themselves. Like if they're at camp, they're comfortable enough to say, well, we don't have to be here, but we want to be here. You know, there is no way I would have said that when I was a kid at camp. I enjoyed it. I had a happy childhood. It was just pretty much just me and my mum for the most part when I was little. But yeah, just that healthy kind of trust that they will figure it out. But I think getting to that point is probably quite challenging, that people just, the adults are the ones that can't handle it.
Well, so my daughter, my oldest, came home and she was talking to her. So it was getting close to when the US goes back to school, and they asked her, you know, oh, when do you go back to school? And she's like, well, we homeschool, so we do school all the time. which isn't exactly right because we only do it 4 days a week, and then we just took a month off to go to India. So, but she didn't like come home and they were like, oh, well, don't you get any breaks? She's like, we get, whenever, we just take breaks whenever we need it. Or she was explaining, like if we don't feel like it or feel sick or whatever, we just don't have to do it those days. And it was just and I just love that she just has this, like, she didn't feel any, I was like, this is cool. This is what we do. And it's fine. Like she's
not worried about the judgment around it.
She's not worrying about the judgment of it. I do think the judgment has changed. I mean, I feel we all, homeschoolers who are homeschooling today owe a huge debt of gratitude to the people that did it, back in the 70s when it was illegal, and actually I learned that a lot of that socialization thing, the stigma came from a period of time when homeschool families, if they took their kids out during regular hours, their kids might be arrested. They could get their kids taken away from them because they weren't supposed to be out, right? So a lot of those kids did have poor socialization because they weren't allowed out because their parents were homeschooling them. But it's not the world now. I mean, there's co-ops. No. I mean, I actually I remember like a year into homeschooling, I was like, I think my kids are getting too much socialization. Like, I don't think the kids at school are getting enough. Like, I think we need to pull back. We're socializing too much.
Yeah. And the time is limited.
Really that way, but like
the time for, as a grown up, like if you're working full time, whatever you might be doing, even if you love what you do, it's the majority of your time, and it's the same for kids at school, right? There's more time spent in those two things, in those two, I guess, institutions of thought, because that is how we do things, and it's not working. So I was just about to make the comment, actually. No. Your Twitter handle is, I discovered you as, is it Hippy Mom? Yeah. And it's just so funny because you don't like being totally judgy. Like, you do not strike me as a hippie. And I think just nowadays, especially since COVID, anyone who was slightly alternative is now gaining a lot more respect than they've previously had. Whether it's, if you used to be a conspiracy theorist, now it's like, oh, you were actually right in a lot of things. About stuff, yeah. You were right about a few things.
We used to say we were evidence-based hippies because we use all this science, but it's like, but it's the stuff that like everyone thinks is crazy stuff because it's the leading edge. I was like, we filter our water and we homeschool our kids and we buy organic mattresses and we do all the organic stuff, and we do intermittent fasting. We do all these different things, and there's lots of evidence for a lot of these things, but everyone's just kind of like, that's, I did the natural, all natural labors, and we, had babies at birth centers. And so we did all these things, which to me is just like, well, that's good. That's just good practices. But to everyone else, it just feels so, we were just so out there, and I think, we were around all these mainstream academics and we just seem out there. But I will say that there's a huge shift in the way even people are thinking about homeschooling. Like, I think it used to just be like, well, that's crazy. And like, I ran into two colleagues. I'll tell you two stories really quickly. One of my older colleagues, and all of his kids are, he has 5 kids, and one of them is about to graduate high school. And I was going into class really late. He's like, oh, you're teaching awful late. And I said, well, I homeschool my kids in the mornings. And he took this big sigh and he looked at me and he said, I wish we had homeschooled our kids. Oh, and it was just like, so this moment of just like, but just even the recognition that that's something to do. And then I have another colleague I just had lunch with, a couple weeks ago, and he was like, well, how's the homeschooling going? I was like, well, it's awesome. And I was just telling him stuff, and he was just like, well, we tried this and it didn't really work. And I was like, well, he was talking about his kids. We couldn't get her to do the homework. And I was like, well, how old is she? He's like 5. And I was like, I'm not supposed to be doing homework. like that's what you're supposed to do when you're 5. And it was just like this, and I was like, it's not school at home. And you get the opportunity to teach them the way a 5-year-old should be learning, which is more kinesthetic, and they can they can just learn magical things. And it's just in really fun ways when they're 5. So anyway, so the point just being is that they're contemplating it. They don't 100% understand how to do it, but it's a completely different ballgame than it was. And I also think, and even the people who aren't contemplating understand that it's hard and recognize that it's a value. So I had someone else the other day that just said, during COVID, I can't believe you do that. And, just like but not in a way that's like dismissive of like, oh, that's crazy. It's just like, that's really hard. It's a completely different and vibe.
I think it's just,
so I just have to be really grateful for.
It's symptomatic of, and you will know this, you studied it, you way more qualified to talk about it than me, but some of my coaching is simply mindset. Like I'm studying NLP. I'm sure there's elements of the science from what you do that's been developed into that modality, but it's just mindset. Just we are thinkers, and we develop our mindset as we get older. We're set in our ways, and being open-minded just seems to be an epidemic. People are afraid because if you think differently, you're going to get yelled at, whether it's online or offline. And so I think I hope a lot of people find real value in this conversation, because it's literally just, you have to embrace a different way of thinking. Parenting is hard, but it's also the best thing anyone says they ever do. So it's like, well, okay, take the rough with the smooth. But so just on a practical level, and then I'm going to switch gears a bit to you. Do you sign up to a curriculum, or you sign up to some kind of body that enables you to do this? Because I have no idea how it works. Do you have guidance, or do you have to literally design a curriculum for your children and experiment?
It depends on, so can I say one thing about what you just said first, if you don't mind?
Yes.
You said something about how people don't want to be open-minded and they don't want to move forward. Like they can't think outside the box.
It's a challenge.
And you're going to get yelled at online, but school teaches you that. Like that's literally one of the lessons of school. And actually, I mean, you should have someone on who actually knows the entire, I've learned about it, but I won't do it nearly justice. But that was one of, we brought over, our school system is from the Prussian model, like pre-Nazi Germany, Prussia. Like they brought over this system, which was about, putting everybody in the same age groups and teaching obedience, teaching, they wanted factory workers. They wanted people that didn't ask questions. They weren't trying to create these, complex
They wanted workers.
Our system, our education system is not designed to do that. Now that being said, there are charter schools and private schools that certainly do that. And I know that and I'm not one of the people that's going to bash teachers, because I think most teachers are trying their very, very hardest.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're working within a flawed system. And a lot of them are really trying their very best, and they're breaking rules to get to do things that are good for kids. But anyway, so I think, school teaches a lot of that. And, and I think that that's part of why people have a hard time thinking outside the box, is because you're not asked to, and you get in trouble for doing that.
And that was a big driver for me off the back of COVID and the various rabbit holes I went down. It's like, it is a new world now. A lot of people were like, during COVID, things are going to go back to normal at some point. And a lot of the people in my circle were all on the same page with, no, there's going to be the world before COVID and the world after COVID. And I think people are still just trying to fit their lives into the pre-COVID way of doing. And it's brought as much opportunity as it brought crisis. And that's kind of what I'm trying to focus on, is just talking to people like you and people that have proven in this new world that we are in, there's just so much opportunity to do things differently, but it is going to require you to be willing to just be a little bit open and source your information, like you said, from evidence, from people that are doing it and have the results to show for it. So everyone needs to go sign up for your Substack.
That all data is flawed. All data is flawed in some way. So you have to
let's
also
not go
use
down
your
that
brain
tangent.
and think through things. No, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. You asked me a good question that I ignored, and I don't remember what it
was. Just parenting in general. Like, it's a challenge, but it's like a lot of things. It's the best thing that people do, but also the hardest thing. And there's ways of navigating it your way, and you've just got to pick where you want to be. I think it was on the spectrum of polarization. You can find your place. A curriculum, designing a curriculum. Yes, that's what it was. It was, do you sign up for something, and are you given guidance and frameworks, or are you winging it?
So it 100% decides. It depends on your country. It depends on and then what's in that country. I actually don't know anything about Australia. Sorry. But within the United States, it depends on your state. So in the states, so the state that I am in is one of the very low regulation. You basically say, hey, I'm homeschooling, and they go, cool, have fun with that. And they say, these are the things that you're supposed to do, but nobody checks that you're doing any of those things. Whereas some of the high regulation states, you might have to take standardized testing, you might have to turn in your portfolios, you might have to turn in worksheets. And so there's a lot more. So it's very varied. Because I have so much freedom, there's pros and cons to that. But I think one of the big pros was that we just really got to experiment a lot at the beginning with what was good for our kids. And we definitely did a lot of deschooling, which is like getting school off of you, like getting out of that school mindset that school has to be a certain way and homework has to be, 5-year-olds need homework. You have to get rid of all those thoughts. But what we do is I kind of pick the best curriculum that matches my kids the best, and we play around with that. So I have their math and language arts has to be with the same group, which is the good and the beautiful. And that won't necessarily fit everybody, but that's the one that we have chosen because it does this spiral approach where they hit something and then they hit it again and they hit it again and they just kind of slowly build complexity. And what's great about that, as opposed to like learning all the arithmetic and then we're going to do clocks and then we're going to do multiplication, but then you forgot arithmetic or you forgot clocks, versus this is this spiral approach. And so you don't have to do testing as much with
integrating.
It's integrating and building. Yeah. And so I really like that. And they do lots of games. Like my little one, it's like, she's got this little boat and she's trying to skip count. So she has this little boat and she's skip counting between these cute little clouds. It's adorable and lovely. Awesome. And there's lots of cutting and doing these kinds of things. So that just was a really good fit for those things. I'm really fussy about science. I was mostly just doing our own science, but I recently got some science that's totally experiment based. So it's super hands-on and has all this stuff. History, I'm using a lot of the Well-Trained Mind, which also, if anyone's listening and really wants to get into homeschooling, the Well-Trained Mind is just an exceptional book. And I use it as a base for the way I think about lots of what we do. I think the way they do history and literature is exceptional. I use a lot of Memorial Press because I think they're exceptional in terms of literature. So, the answer is I pick and choose based on what fits my kids, what's going to be a good, like if I try something out and they get bored or they get frustrated or whatever, okay. That doesn't mean we're throwing out literature. It just means that's not the right curriculum for us. Yeah. That's too stuffy or that's too whatever. So one, fitting my kids, and then two, picking the best of everything that's out there, as you grow up. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's really great is that I feel like all the curriculums have something that's really good about them. Do you know what I mean? Or that's a really good fit for them. And so we can just pick and choose, which is really good. And
I think listening to you, I wouldn't say anxiety is a strong word, but I'm thinking, so how many hours a day are you actually schooling them? And how many hours a day are you having to do that research, to find their curriculum? And then you have to do your job. What does a day look like for you?
A typical day look like?
If it was typical, yes.
Typical. So I get up, I cook. So that's the other thing. I mean, we cook all of our food from scratch and we have a garden. So that's all our hippie stuff. So I cook breakfast and lunch in the morning every day at the same time. And then we start school around 9. We'll do math and language arts in the mornings. And if the deal is if they get done quickly enough, then we get to do science before lunch. And they always get it, but they're like, but we want to do before lunch. Okay, so we have to get done quickly.
Food coma kicks in after lunch.
I can't wait until after lunch. Well, it's because they love it so much. Like, I don't want to wait until after lunch. I want to do it before lunch.
Here you go. You can do a boiling experiment where you cook lunch.
I know. It's like, let's talk about the chemical properties of this noodle. Anyway, so then we'll do, most of the time we do science before lunch, and then we'll do lunch, and in the afternoon it'll be history, or we listen, mostly we listen to other books. I read to them at night, but mostly we'll listen, and we do coloring while we're listening or something like that, or handwriting while we're listening. And then they are responsible, I think I mentioned earlier, they're responsible for their Hindi lessons, their typing lessons, and their recorder lessons, and they choose to do those. They love doing those. So they just pick that, and sometimes they'll play first and then they'll do them. Sometimes they'll, I think today they had friends over, so they only got through one of them. So they were like, I've got to get back. I got to get back from dance and do it. And I was like, it's going to be okay.
So they're self-sufficient.
Like, I just got it. Yeah, they're self-sufficient on those. They're like, but I can't. My streak is going, and I can't.
Amazing. And they're so self-aware. That's fantastic.
It's awesome. The agency that homeschooling has given my kids is it's not believable. It's not believable, really. I mean, they just do things that you just like, all the things that they say that kids won't do. my kids just do, and they love doing it. They love reading. Like they love it, just love it. And they love science, and they love history, all of these things. And then my typical work, I usually work somewhere around from two onwards. But I do work out somewhere in that window of 2 onwards. Yep. I don't tend to do dinner with my kids. I'm there with my husband during that time period, but I do come out and read them stories in the evening. And I am working on probably shifting, job things. But at the moment, that's kind of what it looks like.
That's what I was going to ask you next, because just reading your stuff, listening to you speak, I'm sure I could give you a number of ideas for monetizing your skill set online, and you already are. Like, everyone needs to go and check out your Substack. So on that quickly, so much useful information, but on the get paid side of things, like did you have a Twitter following, or did you just start tweeting about your passion for homeschooling? Because you've got about 5,000 followers. Some people might not think that's much, but if you've got a paid newsletter, $5 a month, like a coffee a month, for such valuable information for anyone who's considering this. Like, what did that start just from COVID and embracing what you were doing and sharing it? Was that purely that?
I got on Twitter really just a way to find people that were having similar experience than I was. And I didn't want to do it under my name initially. I just wanted to just be like, I just want to find other people that are, because like I said, we were having such a different experience from everyone else in terms of my kids. That wasn't all, I don't want to talk about all the other ways that we were having a different experience from everybody else. But I think you can imagine. Yes. And so it was really just a way to connect with people. And then I just found that it really kind of became a journal. I was just kind of journaling cool things that were happening with my kids at home. And then I wrote this tweet about how as a university professor, but I don't trust the system to educate my kids. And it just went bonkers. And then I was like, oh, so people are interested in this. It's like, okay.
There it is.
I got like 1 million people saw it or something crazy. And then it was like, all right. So then I just kind of started moving down that line. And then I always feel like, I'm a new homeschooler. Like, we've been doing it for 3 years, right? There's so many other people that have been doing it so much longer and have so much better capacity to talk about that. But what I do know is science, and I think I'm an educator, and I think I like reading the science, and I also like teaching people how to read science. I think people just like reading the abstract and being like, this is what it says. Did it though? Let's look at the data and let's go through it. And
You're
let's
already a critical thinker.
And I like that for people. So I always try to put in my Substack, like, here's this article. This is what they say. Yep. Here's some caveats. Here's some things I think about.
Here's my take.
Let's put this in the framework of something else. And like, it's just kind of this idea of like, just because they concluded that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the conclusion, right? Yeah. All they can do is say, this is the data that we got. And how you interpret that data is a little different.
And that's, I think, what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is very much on using in his campaign is there's experts on both sides all the time. Which we've seen a lot of that debate. I'm going to move us
to a different location.
That's okay. Yeah. No, I'm looking to wrap up soon anyway. So you do what you need to do. I'll keep talking to you. Are you all right to keep talking whilst you're moving?
Yes, you can keep chatting. Yes.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to move to a different location.
Look at you multitasking, showing everybody it's possible.
Totally possible.
So you started your one tweet. I'll go and find that tweet that went bonkers, as you put it, because that's a common discovery for, I think, people that I coach and talk to about, starting something of your own. It's as simple as that. It's share your experiences. Your view is going to be very different. Your perspective, your conclusions are going to be very different to anyone else. And you will find your people online because they will just they will gravitate towards you. It's community. I said on an episode that I recorded recently, it's meaningful work, because we all want validation, which is the downside, or possibly the extrinsic, not so healthy dopamine that we seek from social media. But it is a need, and to belong. And you get that when you share your opinions authentically and things that you're passionate about. And I hope that your kids are seeing that and seeing that they can you know, you may not be making a full-time income. I don't know. I don't need to know. But the fact is you have taken that, and very simply, there are platforms out there like Substack that enable you to share away, and you can offer extra value to those who see the value in it enough to pay for it. It's as simple as that. So well done. Congratulations. And I will definitely be seeking your consultation if and when I have children, and if and when I get as far as, I've always had a bit of a dream to establish some kind of educational institution of sorts, and that was a huge discovery for me that I didn't know I was passionate about until I went to Bali and I discovered the Green School. Do you know much about the Green School in Bali?
I haven't heard about the Green School, but that's awesome.
Yeah, it's just, and you said it in one of your articles, just school can look so different if we're willing to just open our minds and create that, which is something I'm all about. So let's wrap up. What, and this is probably, you think about these kind of questions, homeschooling your children, but what would you tell your younger self about being you and getting paid? So that those two things usually cover things like, what advice would you give your younger self about knowing yourself, and what advice would you give your younger self about understanding money?
Oh, that's so complicated.
What you tell your
there's
children
the money
versus
piece,
what
and
you
there's
tell
the
yourself.
knowing. Yeah, I was going to say what I would tell myself. Well, there's the money thing. I mean, there's lots of things we would like to. I wish we were in index funds sooner. I wish that we had done Bitcoin a lot sooner. I wish we'd done lots of things. And my kids are certainly going to understand about diversification and all of those kinds of things a lot better, for sure, than we did. And compound interest and how that really works, and how you need to be doing things. You need to be saving a lot of money when you're young. Live like you don't have money even when you get it. For a little while, so you can get that stored away. So I those are kind of from the financial perspective, money perspective. In terms of knowing myself, I think that I wish that I had trusted my gut more. Everyone, and not so much what everyone else says. So I'm certainly in that place now, and it was a long journey to get here. For example, they'll say things, there's a lot of stuff like, oh, well, daycare is really good for kids, and the kids that are in these situations actually do better. And, it's okay, it's normal to feel really sad. It's normal for them to cry when they leave you. And it's like, I didn't want to do any of that stuff. And I hated doing it. And I was just told that it was okay and it was fine, and it wasn't okay. And I wish that I had listened to myself. And I'm not saying, and I'm not going to be a judge. Like, everyone has to listen to themselves and figure out what's right for them and their family. And I'm not judgmental of other people making those decisions. It was not the right choice for me, and it was not the right choice for my children. But that's just me, my kids. And I wish that, so I would have said, listen more to yourself and less to what others are telling you. So maybe there's some,
I think that is a version of the answer everyone has given that I've spoken to so far. It's a version of bet on yourself, back yourself, trust yourself, don't listen to other people. And it's everything I'm trying to reiterate time and time again with what I do and my brand. We haven't really talked about Bitcoin. We'll try and keep it relatively short, but I know you're invested in it. And you've told me your husband manages it. It's not your primary investment, but what's the why behind that? Do you know?
So, I mean, I think our big thing is diversification, right? We just don't really know what's going to work. Diversification of your asset class, right? So, so you want to have, index funds, you want to have gold and silver, where you've got some of that stuff too. You want to have Bitcoin, you want to have, because you just don't really know what the future is going to hold. And so you want to have some diversification. I think we also really love the idea of, the principle that is Bitcoin, right, is this independent, outside of the system. Love that. And I would love for it to be successful. I know there's lots of people trying to take it and put it within the system. And we're like, no, let's not do that. But so I think that suits us. I mean, I think that we've moved more and more outside of the mainstream, as you say. And so Bitcoin lives there, and that suits us, right? Yeah. So it's not our only thing. We're big. We follow a lot of the data. My husband's a data analytics guy, and so he follows a lot of the data and has looked at a lot of what did the data say about what things are going to play out in the traditional markets. And so we do that versus, some of these things are new. We don't know what's going to play out.
Yeah,
I don't know.
For sure. That's really interesting. I think you certainly understand the principle and the value system of it more than most. I guess all I would say is if you have time, which most people don't. I need to get better at tweeting succinctly to help you so that you don't have to find the time. But yeah, you've articulated the why for sure, just being the independent. And it's not so much, it is outside of the system, but it's a new system. Like it's an entirely new ecosystem. And I guess a lot of people will say they've got it as an investment. And it's just so much bigger than that because it's hard money. It's a new version of money. And it's, as you know, it's not faultless. It's not perfect, but it's the only thing we've got that's close to perfect. And it's just evolving all the time. So I guess if you're looking at it and you and your husband are looking at it from an investment perspective in the same way you would index funds, try and just adopt, which I know you're more than capable of, an approach that it's actually something entirely different in the same way that homeschooling is. It's not necessarily better or worse. It's an entirely different approach. It's an entirely, and people are still pricing, and I do, because it's a shift. It's pricing Bitcoin in dollars. It's like if you're pricing it in dollars, that shift the education isn't complete, and it's a lot to learn. But yeah, I would 100%. Both of you guys just listen to some podcasts or read the Bitcoin Standard, or there's so many books out there.
My husband is very into. He went down deep in the Bitcoin realm. We don't invest in things that we don't understand fairly well. He certainly understands it a lot better than I do, but he actually was listening to people and talking about, well, how much do you want? And then they were talking about, well, it's like, well, if everybody switched over and what would be, the best. So he actually went through the whole process of kind of trying to figure out what's an appropriate amount that would, if everything switched over to Bitcoin, that would actually be worth something, and so he went through all of those as we thought about what to invest in and stuff. So I think
it was interesting when you said,
we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time for sure. We'll all be using Bitcoin and homeschooling, I'm sure. There's a lot of people in Bitcoin who are very passionate about wanting to homeschool. So I'm hoping this will reach a few of those people. And you said as well,
independent minders.
Your lesson to yourself about money, and live like you don't have money. We have a saying in Bitcoin: "Stay humble, stack sats," which I don't know if you've heard that, but it's a big one. So awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
It was fantastic to meet you and get to connect with you.
Yeah, you too. I'm sure we'll stay in touch, and I'll make sure I connect your Substack and let people know where they can find you on Twitter. Your handle is at
Hippy Mom, spelled Hippy, Mom, PhD.
The PhD, I love it, and I love what you said about the PhD. Make sure those very important 3 letters are there. Yes.
Well, but that was one of the things I liked about the name, was that it was like this kind of funny. It's like, well, I'm a hippie, but I'm these weird things. I'm a university professor and a homeschooling mom. Like I'm these things that don't make sense together. Like I liked that.
I love it.
And I'm technically on Instagram too, but I don't know anybody. I don't use it.
Yeah, no, I think Hippy Mum PhD is perfect. Having met you and chatted, it's the bridging together of these polar extreme views of the traditional system and the slightly alternative system, and we all need to find our place in the middle somewhere. So thank you so much. We'll keep in touch, and awesome talking to you.
It's fantastic to meet you in person. Well, not in person, but over video. And I want to thank you so much for what you do. I was going through your podcast and teaching people things that they should have known in school. It's such a huge passion of mine. And if you do open a school, I think that would just be beautiful. I think that, we need more people who want to teach people in better ways and connecting with, younger kids or older kids. I mean, there's lots of things people do in high school. I think it's so great that you're a coach and putting all these wonderful things out there. And so it's fantastic to know you, and hope we'll get to chat more often in the future.
We will, for sure. Hello, my friend. As someone who's not the best at finishing the things they start, Thank you so much for making it to the end of this podcast. I hope you found it helpful. Maybe it piqued your curiosity on something new, or even just made you smile for a few seconds. If any of those things apply here, then all my regular tech challenges and tantrums are well worth it to get this to you. If you heard anything at all that you think could help just even one other human being, there's a couple of things you can do that I would really and truly appreciate. Firstly, you can follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. On most podcast platforms, this is usually just a case of hitting a follow button or a plus sign on the main show page. This means you'll never miss an episode, which is hopefully a win-win for us both. Secondly, if you're feeling really generous, you can leave me a 5-star rating or review wherever you're listening. And lastly, feel free to share an episode with a friend on social media with any thoughts, feedback, suggestions, or even criticism. It's okay, I can take it. Just tag me using the handle @AmyTaylorSays to make sure I see it and can thank you personally. Any or all of these things genuinely mean more human beings see and hear these conversations. So again, thank you for being here and helping me with my mission with Be You Get Paid to help as many people as possible know themselves, know money, and be happy. See you next time.